Hello boobies, welcome back. It's time to show you how I turned this into this for my Maria cosplay. Here we go. So first things first, I woke up at 2 p.m. today, got my shoes on, and went to pick up the dye that I ordered for the wig. I momentarily forgot that you could rip these open with a tab, and then got my dye out of the bag. Naturally, I had to give it a good shake and do a test taste. Delicious. I saw everybody else who was dyeing wigs using stainless steel, and it had it on the instructions, so I figured that's what I wanted to use. I had this old one from my grandma, and I got it on the stove with some water. This is how the wig came and what I was working with at base. It's pretty long, and I gave her a good brush. I figured I would adjust the length later, deciding how I wanted to do it. Here, I gave it a good shake, and then I put the dye in the water. I started really light because I didn't want to go too dark. I wanted my Maria to look a little bit more like an at-home job, like she could be a real person who did this months ago, and it faded out a little bit. After using a marshmallow toaster to mix my dye, I gloved up and grabbed the wig. It took me a second to decide where I wanted to start the actual dye bit because I had to estimate where it would fall on my face. But I decided on there, and I ended up dyeing a little bit higher up, but this is where I started. I also really wasn't sure how long I wanted to keep it in the dye and how much it needed to be saturated, but I kind of just yellowed it and went by sight. I know that colors look darker when they're wet, but I honestly underestimated how light the dye was gonna be, both wet and dry. I'm still happy with the end result, but I definitely would have done it darker. By the time I got to the rinsing stage, I kind of just didn't want to do this whole thing again, so I left it as is and decided to just roll with what I had. Here you can see me using the marshmallow fork to just continually push the hair down into the pot, and then I do a couple more rinses with more dye. I wasn't sure if it was safe to let any of the dye sit on the counter, so I made sure to wipe up as I went, and I let Maria sit there for a second on the paper towels. Here I added some more dye to do another dip with more intensity. I'm realizing now that I probably should have just had more in there in general, and I also should have been more patient with letting the wig soak. That being said, this is the first wig that I've had to cut and color and texture and do straight out of the box like this. So I wasn't too hard on myself, but if I could go back in time, I would have just let the wig sit longer and dyed it further up. She was starting to look pretty dark here, so I figured I was getting closer to where I wanted it to be. I decided I needed yet one more phase of an even darker dip to get it exactly where I wanted it. So I just keep dipping and dipping and basically holding it in there for as long as I have the patience for. I did end up adding even more dye a couple more times just to be sure I was going to get it as dark as I wanted. At this point, I felt satisfied with how dark the dye looked on the wig, so I went ahead and rinsed it out and gave it the best squeeze that I could, and then I moved over to the sink to rinse. I used cool water and just kept going until it ran clear, but I'm realizing I probably should have let the wig sit for a minute to let it soak all the way through. Either way, it's a learning experience. This is how the color looked in my bathroom light, still damp, but partially dry on the surface. I was pretty happy with this and left it to air dry while I went to the store to pick up some styling materials. I picked up some got-to-be glued hairspray and some rat tail combs as well to help separate and style the hair. And it hadn't fully dried by the time I came back, so I went ahead and just blow dried the rest of it until it was completely dry all the way through. It was really hard doing the blow dryer like this because I didn't have any weight in the mannequin head, but I had to also use tension to spread the hairs apart, so I had to do this, weird side job on the wig to get every angle, but we ended up getting her dry one way or another. I mounted the wig using a trick that my friend showed me with my tripod, and then I got to work with the first trim. I decided I wanted to go for the traditional short-haired Maria, even though I had ideas of doing a long-haired one. I just didn't want to style that much hair, and I also still wanted the wig to feel like Maria. So here I'm just doing kind of a perimeter trim after the main chop, making sure everything looks relatively even, and of course my assistant had to come over and help me. I decided I would just commit to vacuuming after I was done with this whole process because there was no way I was going to catch every single little synthetic hair that I had chopped off. So here I go ahead and just start sectioning off things. The first couple pieces will be the front parts that you see mostly in the front of the wig. So obviously those are the most important, and I leave them for last because face framing pieces really make the character. I also set the top portion of hair in order to work on the bottom without interference at the roots. I wasn't able to find a crimper and I don't own one, so I had to try a different method for volumizing the hair. I saw this on TikTok, and you basically just tease it all the way to the root, set it with the heat and let it dry, and then you brush it back out. So this is what I did with all the hair in the back, and I ended up being pretty happy with the texture that it gave. I actually think I prefer this to crimping because it has a more natural flow and volume to it without being too textured. It looks super crazy, but as long as you don't go too ham on the teasing, it brushes out super easily. I also went ahead and worked on the bottoms with this round brush that I have to make sure it had some sort of texture. So here I'm just brushing out the last set of hair teasing and kind of going through the texture of the wig. I was happy with what it was at, so I went ahead and just tied it up. That way I could work on the top section. I lowered the wig on the tripod to make it a little bit easier to work with, and then went to town doing some layers. I did a vertical style layer to make it blend a little more easily with the bottoms and to give it more dimension to make it look like a real person would be wearing this wig. I don't like it when the hair is all just one single length and it looks too charactery. I prefer my cosplays to look a little bit more like the person came to life, and that could be someone you see on the street. So on these upper sections, I didn't go 100% as intense with the teasing because I didn't want the texture to be too obvious, especially when I have to go back and smooth down flyaways and such. But I still went ahead and used my round brush to keep texture in the tips and set it like this. And per usual, Oberon is sitting on the toilet to supervise every single thing that I do. So again, I'm just brushing through everything, checking for any spots that have too much or too little texture, and using my fingers to sort of feel everything out. So for these front pieces, I still needed the texture to match, but I wanted to be super careful that it wasn't going to have too much fluff and look awkward. So I was very, very subtle with the teasing on this one and set it like that. I was super careful with the heat as well. I went ahead and turned it down one notch just to make sure that it wouldn't set it too hard. After brushing through everything, I went ahead and went back to trimming. I knew the front pieces were going to need to be a little bit shorter to frame the face nicely, and I wanted to double check anything that was uneven. There were some parts on the underlayer that were just a little bit too choppy, and you could tell that it was, I don't know, a wig. So I went and did some like slanted slices? Some slanted cutting to just remove any harsh lines, and I used the blow dryer to go over any small parts where there was too much texture. Once I was satisfied with the overall cut, I did another check in different lighting just to see how the pink was coming through. So now began the fun part of curling this entire wig without undoing all of the volume that I had added, while still giving it that kind of beach wave look. Maria's hair is actually relatively straight, but it's kind of like this tousled, half-done straight bob over her wavy hair. It's definitely not perfect, but it kind of has this look as if she's still trying to look beautiful while she's stuck in Silent Hill. She's disheveled, but she tries to put herself together. So I wanted to have kind of a loose beachy wave look to it, but without too much outward texture or looking like Utah girls. I knew I wanted to kind of build curls and texture into the wig, so I brushed out the first set and then I went back and curled over the roots to give volume and kind of keep that wavy feel. Again, I'm just going back over and over on the small parts that I missed or that I wanted to add more texture to. I did another trim on the front and then I bumped the ends inward to kind of keep the shape of the bob that Maria has. I styled the front pieces to basically frame my face and then went to town with the first set of hairspray. After that, I did more curling, more hairspray, and basically spent an hour zhuzhing up the hair, setting and resetting the tiniest pieces to make it look natural but still styled. With curls like this that you want to look natural, especially on real hair, you just kind of have to keep going back and forth. Because if you do it all in one big swoop, it's gonna look too uniform and too fake. Maria is supposed to feel real, so I wanted this wig to look like maybe this could be someone's hair. After I finished dousing the entire thing and got to be glued, which by the way smells like I want to eat it, I used my blow dryer to set the glue a lot quicker than it normally would because A, I wanted to film in this, and B, I'm really fucking impatient. Once everything felt dry and a little crispy to the touch, I used the end of the rat tail comb to go through and just separate larger sections so it would still have movement. I did another check through with my fingers, and then once I was happy with that, I got to vacuuming. This was a housewarming gift, and it has a light on it, so you can see every tiny crumb. It's the best. The final wig ended up being a little less pink than I wanted, but I do still like it, and I feel like it's a mix of my natural style and the spirit of Maria's character. A little lived in, a little aged, but still youthful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.